This is a quick overview of the code base for the paper Estimation and Applications of Quantiles in Deep Binary Classification. You can find the code at this URL, github.com/anujastam/binary quantile regression. So the way this repository is laid out, there is a walkthrough notebook that contains the code base for pretty much all of the experiments that are relevant in the paper. There's an individual sections folder which contains each individual part and some additional experiments that may or may not be of importance, and a dataset folder that contains the some of the datasets that are used in the paper. Some of them, such as the image datasets and the Redshift dataset, are too large to include, and so there are some instructions on how you can go about downloading those. So I'll walk you quickly through this walkthrough Jupyter Notebook first. You'll need sklearn, PyTorch, Matplotlib, Pandas, and Jupyter, which are modules you're most likely to already have if you've been doing some kind of data science or machine learning work. Shape or SHAP is the other one that you're going to need for the explainability section. This cell is just for your convenience, where you can use it to hide or toggle cells, because the next cell is very large and contains pretty much every function that you'll be using if you're using any of the code from this paper. So the first one here is just a splitter function for convenience that lets you put in a data set, your input columns, your target columns, the delimiter, the split between your test and your training set, the threshold value in case you're scaling a regression data set, any scalar that you want to use, and whether or not you want to keep the header of the data. And this function will just create your training data set for you along with the testing data set, along with any other things such as class labels, for example. These are the three functions that are most important for for understanding BQR. The cumulative Laplace distribution, like we talk about in the paper, this is the torch implementation of the same. And what you need to keep in mind here is this clamp here, term1.clamp max is equal to 0 and term2.clamp max is equal to 0, because these need to be included in order to prevent nans from arising, because the way the function is designed is only one of these two terms should execute, 1 minus tau into y minus mu by sigma, or minus 1 into tau into y minus mu by sigma. And because of the fact that we're dealing with tensors, we need to use both. So keep term1.clamp so as to ensure that nans don't arise later on. So this is a cumulative distribution function. The log likelihood loss takes that cumulative distribution function. Again, this clamp is just to prevent any nans from showing up, and then it applies the condition if it's 1 or if it's 0 and puts them together. And there is another term here that we have called a custom loss. Now, as we talk about in the paper, it's important to make sure that the quantiles don't cross. To prevent the quantiles from crossing, we add a crossing term here, y pred colon comma 1 colon minus y pred of colon comma colon minus 1. And what this does is it subtracts the subsequent elements depending on what the quantile value is. And in the event that tau of n plus 1 is less than tau of n, that would mean that this number would be a negative number, which is not something that we want to see. And so torch.max of 0 minus 1 into this crossing would be some kind of positive number. And we basically penalize it based on however high it is. We found that a penalty of term of 1 works best, but you can feel free to experiment with what works best for your setup. And the total loss is, of course, just stacking the individual losses that we have for every quantile plus this crossing penalty. We've also found that learning the quantiles together in tandem is a better way of learning, because they're able to learn from the same underlying representation. These functions here for custom test spread are just functions that we use to test our data, test the predictions that we get. All we're really doing is just checking as to whether or not it's less or greater than the mean, and accordingly we apply the CDF function that we talked about earlier. It's not all that different from the regular sigmoid function, and for the CDF we do use a value of 0.5 in tau. And as such, as you can see here, if lesser term dot item is greater than or equal to 0.5, append 1, it means the probability was greater than 50%, otherwise append 0. It's the same as sigmoid for all effective purposes. Accuracy test just applies the same thing over an iterator. Now we have some functions that also we use with BCE to compare between BCE and BQR methods. The training function is also very similar, as it's something you'd be used to seeing if you've been working with Torch, where we just go through a loader, we get the data that we have, we get the outputs, and we just use our custom loss backward step to the optimizer and proceed forward. Note that we use the median as a prediction in all of our tests, and so that's why we have this output quantiles : 4, because this is the output of the median quantile. If you're using a different number of quantiles, make sure to change this value to reflect the middle of the number of quantiles that you have, or in the event that you want to use a different quantile to predict your outputs. This testing module is the exact same, where instead of training, it's just computing the test accuracy. In the case of robustness, we train with BC and we test with BC. These are identical to any standard BC-based network that you're likely to see, where we just use the standard binary cross entropy loss defined by PyTorch. This LR scheduled combined SGD comes from the citations that we have in section 6 of the paper, and it's taken directly from there. The only thing to keep in mind here is this factor equal to 1. The factor that we use is 1 because the factor, when you include the penalty term for the adaptive learning rate, becomes max of the penalty tau and 1 minus tau. And since our penalty was 1, that's what we're using. Train adaptive learning rate is the same as any standard training loop that we have, except we also make sure that we calculate what the required adaptive learning rate is like and then set the learning rate accordingly in this line here. Quantile CDF is just the CDF of the quantile function, and normalize is just to normalize an array for our convenience. This grep function is used in the robustness test, and its job is to flip 100 the ratio % of the labels in the target. For interpolated quantiles and explainability, we have defined the kernel function here, and this smooth quantile is what we described in the equation in the same section. Interpolated mean probability here is used when we're looking at the Shapley summary statistics. So what this does is we have our model and we have these quantiles available to us, and we smooth the quantiles for 0.05 to 0.095, and we get the mean function from the smooth quantiles, and we feed that into our Shapley summary statistic. Create XY Shapley is similar to normal create XY, but also includes an unscaled X as an output. These are standard control variables. So the cell above pretty much has all the common functions you would need, and really you'd only be messing much with the BQR related functions that I described earlier, and everything else is just helper functions to make it easier to work with. These are the standard control variables we use with our patch size, the device, etc. So they're all in one place and you don't have to worry about changing things later. And this is where you define all the quantiles that you want to work with. These are just two networks to compare. So this is our standard our BQR based network, just 110 and 9. We have a similar network for PC with 110 and 1. Remember that with the BQR network, we're getting 9 outputs because we have 9 quantiles. You could change this accordingly to fit the number of quantiles that you want, and that would be a better way of coding things. We have this penultimate function here just to get the output of our model before passing to the final layer, because it's required by the LALR function. Over here, you can adjust the dataset details. So you can just pick up the dataset you need from the dataset folder. This is where you set the threshold value. These are the columns that you'll be using as inputs. Your target column where your output is present. Whatever separator you're using, it could be spaces, tabs, commas, whatever works. Remover determines whether or not it's a header, and the split ratio is train data to test data split. This is the coverage and latent recovery section. In all of the experiments, we usually have this experiment control parameter set where we can control the number of runs and the number of epochs per run, because you'd want to see the average results instead of just seeing one result once. And these arrays here basically just control, they just ways to store the results for all of the different runs that you run through. So in this section, what we basically do is we go through the data, we create the split, we create the data set split, create the tensors and load them accordingly. We then generate this coverage data set here to compare the quantiles against the latent. You need to do this only once, you don't have to do this multiple times. And you just keep that generated and set so that you can compare afterwards. Once that's done, you just go through, you train your model, as you can see here. And then you generate all the predictions that you have from your model, after which you scale accordingly. Over here, this is the part where we scale the values, where we basically find the median value, and we find the probability of the median value. And here is where we check whether or not the quantile value is greater than the latent value at that point and change the coverage array accordingly. This is the function to compute delta, where we basically have the start being the median quantile, and we just keep stepping backwards and forwards respectively. Like we move once to the left and once to the right in each iteration to try and see whether or not we've changed the class label. That's what you're seeing over here, where we're taking the quantile CDF and we're using 0.5, so we're using the median's quantile CDF to determine the class label. And accordingly, we set the delta, and we keep track of the delta so that we can calculate the misclassification rate accordingly. Yeah, this is where we print all of our results. So once you run this notebook, you'll be able to see that after this is done iterating, you'll be able to see the coverage results along with the standard deviation. And we also include a plot of the data. Note that the data set that we're using in this example has a lot of points, so it's very crowded. If you're using fewer data points, you'll be able to see the various quantiles that are generated a lot more clearly. This is the confidence score-based metrics. Because we've already looped through the entire data set earlier and we've already computed the delta values, we don't bother doing it a second time. We just pull it from the previous cell. All we're just doing is checking the misclassification rate according to the delta score. And we plot it out here. Since we already have those values as well, and we have a collection of every sample per confidence level, we can generate the precision recall curves at every confidence level, which is what you see over here. And you can see that clear trend that we talked about earlier, where as the confidence score increases, the area under the curve also increases accordingly. For robustness, again, we generate our two new networks. So we have our BQR network and a BC network. And what we basically do is we have a number of iterations. So how many times you want to run this experiment and the number of epochs that we have. We have a collection of different noise ratios. So we vary from 0 noise to 0.4 noise. And then for each noise ratio, we run we go through the number of iterations that are required so that we can get an idea of, on average, what the performance is like for both BC and BQR. And so you can see as it prints, it'll tell you what level it's at and what iteration it's going through. And then finally, it'll put everything together and give you a tabulated set of results for that data set. Coming to interpolated quantiles, here we define the attributes that we'll be playing with. So we define an attribute index, which is the one attribute that we're saying we can vary. This is to generate the heart rate curve that you saw earlier in the paper as well as in the presentation. And you give it the name that you want to change with and the latent name, which is whatever f of x is supposed to represent. And a step value, which is how, by what value do you want to increment this attribute that you're trying to control. So we just create XY shapely to create the data set that we require. Again, we just train our model as we see fit. And we then just find the median values of the columns that we're looking to keep constant. Once that's done, we scale the values accordingly. That's just because of the fact that our function requires zero mean and unit standard deviation. We create a dataset loader, and we also make sure that we have interpolated data that's available. And once that's done, we can just plot the original quantiles that we generated. So you see the original curves that we have for the abalone age function here. And these are the smooth versions of the interpolated quantiles that we generate. And we use a lambda function to use the interpolated mean probability function I talked about earlier, along with the other column names that are available. We put those together and use the Shapely kernel explainer function that's available in the shape package to create this Shapely summary plot, where you can basically see the effect of the various attributes on your function. Then coming to the Lipschitz adaptive learning rate, what we do here is we have a target accuracy that we want to set to. This print trigger is just for debugging, where you can adjust accordingly to see the number of epochs in between each print and the maximum number of epochs that you're willing to go to. And this is also very similar, where all we're really doing is we are generating the data set, we're training it once again, but we're keeping tabs of what the accuracy is each time we test and checking as to whether or not it's matching our target accuracy, as you can see here. While the accuracy is less than the target accuracy. So we do this with both a adaptive one and a fixed one, and we just compare the two to see how far we need to go in order to reach the target accuracy. We do 3 comparisons, one with a learning rate of 0.01, one with a learning rate of 0.1, and one that's adaptive. And then you'll be able to see all the required results here. Aside from that, I'd like to draw your attention to the individual experiments folder, where you can see all of these experiments in more detail. If you just want to conduct these individual experiments, you can also see results for some simulated distributions. The other one I'd like to bring your attention to is this trust score comparison. Here is where we compare with the trust score module that Google has. So all of these functions are the exact same that you saw previously. But aside from that, we have these cells here, which all come from Google's trust score library. They're the exact same code base, and what this does is it computes the trust score of a point. And all we're really doing at this stage is we go through the data set, we again train our model, and once that is complete, we get our delta scores accordingly. And then we also fit a trust score model to all the data and all the labels that we have. Once that's done, what we do is we go through and we sort our trust scores, and we basically make 10 bins. So we're making decile bins out of the trust scores that we have, and we get the confidence slice, or our delta score slice for each of those bins, and the corresponding trust score slice for each of those bins. So the trust scores have been sorted in ascending order, and we're getting the average trust score of the bottom 10%, then the next 10%, 10% after that, so on and so forth. And we're getting an average confidence score accordingly for the same. Once again, we're making sure that we're running this multiple times. So we have, in this case, 10 runs. And so we're basically just making sure that each slice has a correct confidence score associated with it. And we compare the two to see what the difference is between the delta score and the trust score that we generate. And that covers pretty much all of the code base for this paper. As I said earlier, this one notebook is pretty much all you need to go through in order to understand what exactly we're doing. And these 3 functions here are the bread and butter of the paper, which are really what contribute to the loss function. Thank you.